The irony of it still catches me sometimes, usually late at night when the house is too quiet and I'm sitting with my second cup of chamomile, replaying every moment I could have seen it coming. My name is Margaret Calloway. Most people who love me call me Maggie. I turned 63 in March, and what I remember most about that birthday isn't the cold rain tapping against my kitchen window, or the lemon cake my neighbor Ruth brought over wrapped in her good dish towel. What I remember is the package sitting on my front porch when I opened the door that morning. A brown box, beautifully wrapped in craft paper and a yellow ribbon, and the name on the return label, my daughter's name. After 4 years of silence, 4 years, I want you to understand what that means. 4 years of dialing a number that rang and rang. 4 years of birthday cards returned unopened. 4 years of driving past the exit on the highway that would have taken me to her house, knowing if I took it, there'd be a police escort back. 4 years of watching other grandmothers at church push strollers and bounce babies on their knees, and pressing my lips together and looking at the floor. 4 years of my daughter Diane being alive and well somewhere in this world and choosing every single morning not to call me. And then, on a Tuesday in March, a box on my porch with her handwriting on it. I stood in the doorway in my bathrobe for a long time. I didn't pick it up right away. I know that sounds strange, but when you've been hurt the way I'd been hurt, even good things can feel dangerous. My late husband Gerald used to say I had good instincts. He passed 8 years ago now, and there are days I think the grief of losing him was the only thing that kept me sane during the years with Diane, because at least that kind of loss made sense. At least that wasn't a choice someone made. I finally picked up the box. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. I made my coffee first. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that most things can wait 5 minutes for a woman to have her coffee in peace. Then I sat down and I opened it. Inside was the most beautiful gift basket I had ever received, and I mean that sincerely. There was a round tin of homemade shortbread, the kind dipped in chocolate on one end, tied with a little bow. There were 2 small jars of strawberry preserves with handwritten labels, Diane's handwriting, careful and slanted the way I taught her. There was a jar of raw local honey with a wooden honey dipper tucked alongside it. And at the bottom, a small envelope, a birthday card. Just 4 words inside, in that same slanted handwriting. Thinking of you, Mom. I cried for 20 minutes. I am not ashamed to say it. I sat at my kitchen table in my bathrobe with my coffee going cold. And I cried the way you cry when something you stopped believing in suddenly appears to be real again. I thought, she remembered. I thought, maybe the silence is finally over. I thought, maybe Carter is letting her reach out, because that was always the thing about Carter Hargrove, Diane's husband of 5 years, the man she married 6 months after Gerald's funeral, the man who wore a suit to a graveside service and spent the reception talking about real estate. Carter had always been the wall between me and my daughter. I knew that. I just didn't know how thick that wall was. I set the card on my windowsill where I could see it while I washed dishes. I put the preserves and the honey in the pantry. I opened the shortbread tin and took one. It was good. Rich, buttery, not too sweet, I thought. My daughter made these with her own hands and sent them to me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years, which was hope. I didn't call her. I wanted to, desperately, but I also knew that if I called too soon, too eager, it could spook whatever fragile thing had just sprouted between us. So I decided to wait a day or 2, let her know I received it, thank her, see where things went from there. The next evening, Ruth came over. Ruth Abernathy has been my neighbor for 11 years and my closest friend for about 10 of them. She lives 2 houses down. She brings me soup when I have a cold, and I bring her soup right back when I'm doing better. She was the one who sat with me in the emergency room the night Gerald's heart gave out. And she was the one who showed up the following 3 Saturdays in a row just to make sure I wasn't sitting in the dark. If anyone on this earth deserves good things, it is Ruth Abernathy. She came over to return my casserole dish and to wish me a belated happy birthday. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, the way we always do, and I told her about the package. I showed her the card. Her eyes went soft. "Oh, Maggie," she said. "I know," I said. "I don't want to read too much into it." But it felt like I don't know. A door opening. We talked for a while about Diane, about Carter, about the grandchildren I'd never been allowed to meet. And then Ruth mentioned that she had a small dinner the following Friday, her sister visiting from Cleveland, a few people from our book club. She was going to make her famous biscuits, maybe a cake. I asked what I could bring. "Nothing, Maggie. You just show up." But I am not the kind of woman who shows up empty-handed. I looked at the pantry and thought about those beautiful jars of strawberry preserves. Ruth loved preserves. She put them on everything. And honestly, staring at those jars every morning and thinking about Diane was starting to feel bittersweet in a way I hadn't anticipated. I thought maybe spreading that goodness around was exactly what Diane would have wanted. It felt generous. It felt right. "Actually," I said, "I have these gorgeous homemade strawberry preserves. My daughter sent them. They're beautiful handmade labels and everything." Ruth's face lit up. "Your daughter made those?" "She did." "Then I would be honored." I gave her both jars and the honey. I kept the shortbread for myself because I'd already opened the tin. Ruth hugged me on her way out, holding the jars carefully like they were something precious, which I suppose they were. That was Thursday. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and felt the air leave my chest all at once. Diane, calling me directly, not texting, not a card calling. I picked up on the second ring. "Diane, Mom." Her voice was strange. Tight. "Mom, I wanted to call and say happy birthday. A little late. I know. Did you get the package?" "I did," I said. "Diane, it was so beautiful. The preserves, the honey, I don't even know what to say. And the card. I've been looking at it every day." There was a pause on her end. Then, "Did you try everything? Did you try the preserves?" Something about the way she asked it gave me a small, odd feeling. Not alarm, not yet. Just something slightly off. Like a piano key that sounds almost right but not quite. "I actually gave the preserves to Ruth," I said. "You remember Ruth, my neighbor? She had a little dinner and I wanted to bring something. The shortbread I've been snacking on, though, and it's absolutely wonderful." The silence that followed was not a normal silence. It stretched 4-5 seconds longer than it should have. And in that silence, I heard something I could not quite name. A sharp intake of breath, a kind of stillness that felt less like surprise and more like calculation. "You gave them to your neighbor," Diane said finally. "Yes. Both jars and the honey." Ruth was thrilled. "Which neighbor, Mom?" Her voice had changed. Not frantic. Not warm. Careful. "Ruth. Ruth Abernathy, 2 doors down." "Diane? Is everything okay? I have to go." She hung up. I sat holding the phone for a long moment. I told myself she must have been called away by one of the children. I told myself Carter was probably in the room. I told myself there were 100 explanations, and I was reading into nothing because I was nervous and hopeful and hadn't spoken to my daughter in 4 years, and every silence felt loaded. I put the phone down. I went back to my Saturday. Ruth called me Sunday afternoon. She called to tell me that her sister had been sick since Friday night. Stomach pain, vomiting, some numbness in her hands that had been frightening enough to warrant a visit to urgent care. Ruth herself had felt poorly Friday evening, but assumed it was something she'd eaten at lunch. Her sister, though, hadn't eaten anything unusual, just the biscuits Ruth made with the strawberry preserves. My stomach turned over so hard I had to sit down. "Ruth," I said very carefully, "did anyone else at the dinner have the preserves?" She thought about it. Her sister, a woman from book club named Patty, who'd spread some on a biscuit. Patty had texted Ruth Saturday morning, saying she didn't feel well either. I didn't say anything about Diane. Not yet. I didn't know what I knew. I didn't know if I was being a paranoid old woman connecting dots that weren't connected. I told Ruth I hoped her sister recovered quickly. I hung up and sat very still at my kitchen table for a long time, I thought about Diane's voice on the phone. Did you try everything? Did you try the preserves? I thought about the silence after I said I'd given the jars away. I thought about Carter Hargrove in his suit at Gerald's funeral. And then I did something I should have done immediately. I went to look at the shortbread tin. I looked at the chocolate-dipped cookies. I had eaten 3 or 4 over the past few days, a few bites at a time, and I felt fine. Perfectly fine. But Ruth and her sister and Patty had all gotten sick from the preserves, not the shortbread, just the preserves. I closed the tin. I put it in a paper bag and set it aside. I took a photo of the label on Diane's card. Then I got in my car, and I drove to the urgent care clinic where Ruth's sister had been treated. I know some people would have called Diane first, demanded an explanation, but I had been a school librarian for 31 years, and the one thing I understood was that information needed to be gathered before conclusions were drawn. I was not going to call my daughter and give her warning that I suspected something, not until I knew what I suspected. The urgent care doctor was kind and patient with me. He confirmed that Ruth's sister had presented with symptoms consistent with ingesting something toxic. They had treated it as likely food poisoning. But there were some aspects of her presentation that were unusual. He asked if I knew what she had eaten. I told him about the preserves. He asked if I still had the jars. I didn't. I'd given both to Ruth, and Ruth had used most of one jar Friday evening. But Ruth still had the second jar in her refrigerator, untouched. I called her immediately and told her not to open it, not to touch it, and that I was coming over. Maggie, what's going on? Ruth's voice was frightened. I'm not sure yet, I said. Please just don't open that jar. When I got to Ruth's house and held that second jar in my hands, I noticed something I hadn't noticed when I'd pulled it from the box. The seal on the lid was slightly uneven. Not dramatically, just slightly. The kind of thing you'd only see if you were looking. The handwritten label was perfect, careful, exactly like Diane's writing. But the seal was wrong. Like the jar had been opened and resealed. I drove to the police station. I want to be clear about something. I did not walk into that police station absolutely certain my daughter had tried to poison me. I walked in with a sealed jar of preserves that had made 3 people sick. A phone call that replayed itself in my mind on a loop, and a feeling in my chest that I wished with everything I had was wrong. The officer at the desk, a young woman, couldn't have been older than 30, took one look at my face and came around the counter. Ma'am, are you all right? I think someone may have tampered with a food product, I said. I think people have been hurt, and I think I might have been the intended recipient. I told her everything. Diane's package, the phone call, Ruth's sister, the seal on the jar. She took me to a detective, a tall, quiet man named Detective Okafor, and I told the whole story again from the beginning. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. He took the jar into evidence. He took the shortbread tin as well. He told me not to contact Diane or Carter. Is there somewhere you can stay for a few days? He asked. I can stay with Ruth, I said. Good. He looked at me with an expression I had seen before, in the faces of parents at school, when I had to call them about something serious, the expression of someone who suspected the news was going to get worse before it got better. Mrs. Calloway, I have to ask, do you know of any reason someone in your family might want to harm you? I thought about Carter Hargrove. I thought about the life insurance policy Gerald and I had taken out in the 90s. The one we'd never gotten around to updating the beneficiary on. The one that still listed Diane as secondary beneficiary after me. I hadn't thought about it in years. I told the detective about it. He wrote it down without expression. We'll look into it, he said. I stayed with Ruth that week. Her sister recovered. Patty recovered. Ruth had been sick for one evening, and that was all, because she'd only had a taste of the preserves herself. Being a good hostess. Making sure there was enough for her guests. 3 women sick to varying degrees. 3 women who ate from those jars that had been sent to me for my birthday with my name on the label. On the 4th day, Detective Okafor called me. The lab had found a substance in the strawberry preserves. Something I won't name here because I still have nightmares about hearing the word. It was not a common household substance. It was not something you'd find under a kitchen sink. It was something that required knowledge and access and, in large enough quantities, caused exactly the kind of symptoms Ruth's sister had experienced. Stomach pain, nausea, numbness in the extremities. In a larger quantity, the quantity that 2 full jars would have contained, had I eaten them myself over the course of a birthday weekend, the outcome could have been very different. I sat on Ruth's couch and held the phone to my ear while Detective Okafor spoke, and I felt the strangest thing. Not terror, not grief. Something more like the moment a word you've been trying to remember suddenly surfaces. A dark, quiet recognition. Oh, so that was it. That was what this was. Carter Hargrove was arrested on a Thursday. I did not find out until later, much later, after the trial, exactly how much of it was him and how much was Diane. What I know is what came out in the investigation. Carter had debts, significant ones, the kind that didn't show up on a surface-level check of his life, the kind accumulated in private and hidden behind a very nice house and a very expensive suit. He had known about the insurance policy. He had known that if I died, and if the cause was obscured enough to look like natural illness, Diane would inherit. He had been the one to suggest the gift. He had been the one to prepare the preserves. Diane, my Diane, had wrapped the box. She had addressed it in her handwriting. She had signed the card. Thinking of you, Mom. When Detective Okafor told me about Diane's involvement, I asked him to repeat it. Not because I didn't hear him, because I needed a moment with the words before they became permanent. She knew, I said. It appears so, he said carefully. The investigation is ongoing. I thanked him and hung up and went outside and sat on Ruth's back porch steps and looked at her garden, which she'd started putting to bed for the season, everything brown and neatly covered. I thought about Diane as a child, the way she used to fall asleep in the car, and I'd carry her inside. I thought about teaching her to read, which she was determined to learn before kindergarten. Sitting at this very kind of kitchen table, not so different from mine, going through picture books with our heads bent together, I thought about how she had looked at her father's funeral, destroyed, barely holding herself upright, and how I had held her hand through the whole service and thought, at least we have each other. At least we still have each other. I sat on those steps for a long time. I did not cry, which surprised me. I think I had cried all the tears I had for Diane somewhere in those 4 years of silence. What was left was something quieter and harder and more permanent. Ruth found me out there eventually and sat down beside me without saying anything, which is one of the reasons I love her. She knew, I said, because I had to say it to someone. Ruth put her arm around me. I know, honey, what kind of person I started, and then stopped, because I didn't actually want the answer to that question. I already knew the answer. You're going to be okay, Ruth said. I know, I said, and I meant it, which was its own kind of miracle. The case moved forward the way these things do, slowly and thoroughly, and with a great deal of paperwork. Carter Hargrove was charged. Diane was charged as an accessory. Ruth's sister, fully recovered, gave a statement. Patty gave a statement. I gave more statements than I could count, in rooms with fluorescent lighting and cups of bad coffee, going over every detail again and again until the story felt like something that had happened to someone else. There were people who asked me how I didn't see it coming, how I didn't suspect something when Diane reached out after 4 years out of nowhere, and I tell them the same thing every time, because she was my daughter. Because hope doesn't follow logic. Because when someone you love reaches out after years of silence, you don't think, what is the angle here? You think, she came back. You think, thank God, she came back. That is what mothers do. That is, perhaps, the thing that someone like Carter counted on. What saved me wasn't wisdom. It wasn't instinct, exactly, though Gerald always said I had good instincts. What saved me was Ruth's birthday dinner. What saved me was the simple, ordinary impulse to show up with something nice and bring joy to a room full of people I loved. I gave away the gift because I wanted to share it, because that is who I am, and no amount of betrayal is going to change that. I moved the card from my windowsill eventually. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a box, in the closet, with other things that are too heavy to keep visible but too important to discard. Thinking of you, Mom, 4 words. Whether she meant them or not, I'll never know for certain. I choose to believe some part of her did. I have to believe that, not for her sake, but for mine. I still live in my same house. I still have coffee with Ruth every week. I still go to church on Sundays. And I still sit a few rows behind the grandmothers with the strollers. And I still press my lips together sometimes and look at the floor, but less than I used to, a little less than before. There's something that happens to you when you survive a thing you weren't supposed to survive. It's not invincibility. It's not fearlessness. It's something quieter than that. It's the understanding, deep in your bones, that you are still here, that the story isn't finished, that the people who tried to write the ending for you were wrong, and you get to keep going. And that quiet, stubborn fact is the most powerful thing in the world. I turned 64 last March. Ruth brought a lemon cake. I made the coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I opened a box with a yellow ribbon and cried for 20 minutes over 4 words from a person I loved more than my own life. No packages on the porch this year, and for the first time in a very long time, I was glad.